Rick stumbled forward, shoving Tommy aside with surprising force. I know what I saw. She wanted out. Said she didn't want to be trapped in this life. He gestured wildly around the room, his eyes brimming with a mix of fury and despair. Then his voice dropped, a chilling whisper. Lila. My Lila. She found her freedom in the sand. But you promised, Lila had wailed, tears welling in her eyes. You never play with us anymore. You're always just grumpy. That word, grumpy, seemed to snap something inside Rick. He'd slammed his glass down, the sharp clink echoing in the tense silence. Lila, go to your room. Now. I don't need a child telling me what to do. You think this is easy? You think I want to be like this? His voice, though not a shout, carried a raw edge that sent a shiver down Tommy's spine. Lila's face crumpled. Her eyes, usually so full of life, brimmed with tears of hurt and frustration. I hate you, she'd screamed, the words ripping through the air like a knife. I wish I could just disappear. I wish I could go somewhere where nobody ever tells me what to do, where I can be free. She'd spun on her heel, her small feet thudding as she ran from the room, the sound of the door slamming shut behind her like a final punctuation mark. Rick had slumped back, his head in his hands, a low groan escaping his lips. Tommy had hesitated, then followed Lila, hoping to comfort her, but she was already gone. The door to their room was open, and her teddy bear lay discarded on the bed. A frantic search of the hotel room, then the corridor, then the pool area. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at Rick. He called her name, his voice growing hoarse, a rising terror in his chest. Lila! He found Tommy, wide-eyed and shaken, standing by the hotel lobby doors. She's gone, Dad. She's not here. A tidal wave of shame and fear washed over Rick. He, a trained soldier, had lost his own daughter. He'd driven her away with his darkness. How could he face Rena? How could he tell her he'd failed so spectacularly? The thought of her devastated face, her unyielding questions, was unbearable. He couldn't. He just couldn't. He grabbed Tommy's arm, his grip surprisingly firm. Listen to me. She's probably just hiding. We'll find her. But we don't tell your mom. Not yet. We don't want to worry her until we know for sure. Understand? His voice was low, urgent, laced with a desperation that silenced any argument Tommy might have made. Rick searched, methodically at first, then frantically. He scoured the hotel grounds, the nearby beach, the small shops. He spoke to hotel staff, showing them Lila's photo, his voice a tight, strained whisper. No one had seen her. The hours bled into the next, the scorching sun giving way to a chilling desert night. Every shadow seemed to mock him. Every rustle of the palm trees sounded like a child's cry. He walked the perimeter of the hotel, then ventured further, past the last of the lights into the encroaching darkness of the desert. He saw nothing but endless sand, stretching out under a sky ablaze with stars. He returned to the hotel in the early hours of the morning, defeated, hollowed out. Lila was gone. And the secret, heavy and suffocating, had just begun its decade-long burden on his soul. The kitchen table, usually a battleground of forgotten bills and half-eaten meals, had transformed into a war room. Maps of Egypt, printed clumsily from the internet, were spread across its surface, overlaid with Tommy's old spiral notebook and the crumpled note from Rick's locket. Rena's fingers, no longer trembling with pure fear but with a newfound exhilarating urgency, traced the coordinates Tommy had found. N2958, E30.93, she murmured, her voice laced with a raw, almost disbelieving hope. That's in the Fayoum Oasis region, southwest of Cairo. Tommy nodded, his eyes bright with a determination Rena hadn't seen in him since he was a child. Max said, where freedom whispers in the sand. The Fayoum is known for its ancient ruins, its isolation. It fits. One crisp autumn evening, a year after her return, Lila found Rick in the backyard, tending to the small, neglected garden he was slowly bringing back to life. He was kneeling, carefully loosening the soil around a wilting rosebush. Rick stumbled forward, shoving Tommy aside with surprising force. I know what I saw. She wanted out, said she didn't want to be trapped in this life." He gestured wildly around the room, his eyes brimming with a mix of fury. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lila, desert, freedom, sand. Tommy froze, the notebook in the attic, the cryptic coordinates, the familiar symbol, all of it flashing through his mind. A cold dread seeped into his bones. His father, in his drunken delirium, was saying something. Something about Lila, something more than just the usual self-pitying laments. He knew something. The argument devolved into a desperate, heartbreaking mess. Rick, consumed by his demons, eventually collapsed onto the sofa, his incoherent muttering fading into a loud, rasping snore. Rena, her face pale and drawn, quietly began to clean up the shattered glass, her movements slow and deliberate. Tommy waited, heart still thrumming. He watched his mother, her shoulders slumped with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He knew he had to do something. As soon as the house fell silent, a heavy quiet punctuated only by Rick's drunken snores, Tommy slipped into his father's bedroom. The air hung thick with the stale scent of whiskey and despair. He moved methodically, searching through dresser drawers, under the bed, even checking the pockets of discarded jeans. Nothing. Then his gaze fell on an old military dog tag, tarnished with age, hanging on a hook near Rick's bedside table. It wasn't just a dog tag. It was a locket, a small, worn piece of metal Rick had always worn, even after the war. Tommy had seen it 1,000 times, never thinking to question it. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the familiar contours. He remembered Rick always fidgeting with it, a nervous habit. With a sudden intuitive jolt, he pressed the small, almost invisible seam along its edge. A tiny click. The locket sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, folded impossibly small, was a sliver of faded, yellowed paper. Tommy's heart hammered against his ribs as he carefully unfolded it. 2 lines of elegant, unfamiliar script. Arabic, he realized, from the loops and flourishes, and etched beneath them, unmistakable, was the symbol from the old notebook. The stylized bird with the outstretched wings. A chilling certainty settled over him. This wasn't just another drunken ramble. This was a message, a secret, 10 years in the making. The old diner smelled of stale coffee and forgotten dreams, a scent that clung to Tommy's clothes as he slid into the worn booth. Across from him, Mac Miller, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten battles, nursed a mug of lukewarm black coffee. Mac had served with Rick in Fallujah, and of all his father's old army buddies, he was the only one who seemed to possess a shred of the sanity that Rick had lost. Tommy pushed the tiny, yellowed note across the laminate tabletop. "Mac, I need your help with something." Mac's gaze, usually wary, softened slightly as he picked up the paper, his calloused thumb tracing the foreign script. He frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Arabic. My spoken isn't great, but I can usually make out the written word. We picked up a few phrases, had to. Over there." He squinted at the faded ink. "She chose her path. Find her where freedom whispers in the sand. Family waits." Tommy felt a jolt, a cold, electric current running through him. Freedom. Sand. The same words his father had slurred in his drunken stupor. "What does it mean?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the clatter of plates in the distance. Mac shook his head slowly. "Could be anything, a metaphor, or something else." His eyes then fell on the small, intricate symbol beneath the text. He picked up the paper again, holding it closer, his breath catching slightly. "Well, I'll be damned." "What is it?" Tommy pressed, leaning forward, his gaze fixed on Mac's face. A ghost of a smile, tinged with melancholy, touched Mac's lips. This is something Rick drew. A lot. Especially in the quiet moments. When the dust storms rolled in, or after a particularly rough patrol. He gestured vaguely with the note. He called it the Desert Wanderer, said it was a symbol of a god or a spirit from ancient Egyptian folklore, a protector of lost children, of those who strayed from the path, searching for their own way. Tommy felt a tremor in his hands. A protector of children who strayed? Yeah, that's what he believed, Mac confirmed, his voice distant, lost in his own memories. He said it was a symbol for kids who didn't fit in, who felt confined by rules, kids who just wanted to be free. He used to say Lila had that spirit in her, even as a little girl, always questioning, always pushing boundaries. He paused, his gaze meeting Tommy's, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He drew it, every time he felt like he'd lost a piece of himself, or when he was missing you kids. It was his way of coping, I guess. The pieces began to click into place, horrifyingly, unequivocally. Lila, her rebellious streak, even at 8. Her longing for something more, something beyond their strained family life. Her father, spiraling into a world of pain and self-loathing, yet clinging to a symbol of freedom and protection for his lost child. The words on the note, the coordinates in the diary, the drunken ramblings, the symbol. It wasn't a kidnapping. It was a secret. And it was a secret Rick had carried for 10 long, agonizing years. The implications hit Tommy with the force of a physical blow, leaving him breathless. His sister hadn't been taken. She had chosen, and his father had known, all along. The front door clicked shut behind Tommy, the sound almost lost in the suffocating silence of the house. Rena was at the kitchen table nursing a mug of tea, her face etched with a familiar weariness. She looked up, a faint, questioning frown on her brow. "You're home early," she murmured, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Everything all right with Mac?" Tommy walked to the table, the small, crumpled note from Rick's locket clutched in his hand. He placed it gently in front of her, the faded Arabic script and the stylized bird symbol stark against the white laminate. "Mom, I found this, in Dad's locket." Rena's eyes, dulled by years of sorrow, widened. She picked up the tiny paper, her fingers trembling slightly. "What is it?" Mac translated it. It says, "She chose her path. Find her where freedom whispers in the sand. Family waits." Tommy's voice was steady, but inside, a storm raged. And this symbol. Mac says Dad used to draw it all the time when he was deployed. He said it's an ancient Egyptian symbol, for a protector of lost children, of wanderers. Rena stared at the note, her mind struggling to comprehend. "Lost children? What are you saying, Tommy?" Her voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thing that threatened to break. "Mom," Tommy said, his gaze locked onto hers. Dad knew. He knew all along. He took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Remember, before the trip? How much Lila hated it here? How she fought with Dad almost every day?" A flicker of memory crossed Rena's face, a shadow of the tension that had permeated their home. Yes, of course, she was so angry with him, said he was never present, always in his own head. "And remember what she used to say?" Tommy pressed, leaning forward. "She used to complain about the rules, about how our house felt like a cage. She'd talk about wanting to be free, about finding her own adventures. Even at 8, she had this fierce independence, this longing to just escape." Rena's hand, still clutching the note, began to shake. She remembered the arguments, the defiant glint in Lila's eyes, the way her daughter would stomp off, muttering about unfairness and wanting to be somewhere else. She remembered a particularly heated exchange just days before the trip, about Lila wanting to spend her allowance on a stray cat, and Rick, in a rare fit of anger, shouting about responsibility and how she needed to learn to follow rules. Lila had run to her room, slamming the door, and later Rena had overheard her talking to her teddy bear about running away to a place where no one told her what to do. At the time, Rena had dismissed it as childish fantasy, a tantrum. Now the memory was a chilling echo, a premonition she had failed to heed. "The desert," Rena whispered, her eyes wide with the terrifying realization. "She ran away. She didn't get kidnapped. She ran away." The truth, long buried beneath layers of grief and despair, was finally unearthing itself. Sharp and painful, but also, inexplicably, hopeful. For 10 years, she had lived with the terrifying image of Lila being taken against her will. This raw, shocking revelation offered a different, albeit agonizing, possibility. Her daughter, a fierce little spirit, had made a choice, and somewhere, out there, she might still be. The thought, once unthinkable, ignited a fragile spark in Rena's weary heart. The Egyptian sun beat down with an unforgiving intensity, baking the ancient stones of the hotel courtyard. But the heat outside was nothing compared to the simmering inferno inside their small family suite. Rick, usually a man of quiet fortitude, had been a coiled spring since they arrived, his face a mask of brooding silence. His eyes, once alive with the soldier's sharp focus, now seemed to look through everything, seeing only the ghosts of his past. The easy camaraderie he'd shared with his children before his deployment was long gone, replaced by a chilling distance that felt like a betrayal to Lila. Lila, all 8 years old, with a spirit as wild as her tangled brown hair, had been trying all week, trying to coax a smile from her father, trying to engage him in games of hide-and-seek, trying to pull him out of the dark well he'd fallen into, but each attempt was met with a gruff dismissal, a blank stare, or a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. That morning, it had finally boiled over. Lila, clutching her worn teddy bear, had found Rick staring blankly at the TV, a half-empty glass of something strong beside him. "Daddy?" she'd pleaded, her voice small but insistent. "Can we go to the beach? You promised." Rick had barely stirred. "Not now, Lila. Go play with your brother." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "But you promised," Lila had. That word, grumpy, seemed. Lila's face crumpled. Her eyes. She'd spun on her heel. Tommy had hesitated, then. He found Tommy, wide-eyed and shaking. A tidal wave of shame. He grabbed Tommy's arm. Rick searched methodically at first. He returned to the hotel and the kitchen table, usually a N2958, E30.93. Tommy nodded, his eyes bright with a determination Rena hadn't seen in him since he was a child. Mac said. The realization settled between them, heavy and profound. Lila wasn't taken. She ran. The monster they had imagined, the shadowy figure of a kidnapper, dissolved, replaced by the heartbreaking image of an 8-year-old girl, defiant and desperate for an escape, choosing her own path into the vast, indifferent desert. It was a different kind of pain, a different kind of terror, but also a fragile, agonizing spark of possibility. "We need help," Rena said, pushing herself away from the table. "Professional help. Someone who knows what they're doing, who can understand the nuance of this betrayal." Tommy didn't need to ask who she meant. There was only one person. Detective Miles Corbin's office was a shrine to forgotten cases. Stacks of dusty files, faded missing persons posters tacked to a corkboard, a general air of melancholic efficiency. He was a man worn smooth by years of tragedy, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of someone who had seen too much. He remembered the Lila Marlowe case vividly, a cold case that had always bothered him, a knot he couldn't untangle. He listened patiently as Rena, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperate hope, recounted Tommy's discovery. She laid out the old notebook, the locket, the small yellowed note, and the translation. Tommy, for his part, explained the cryptic symbol and Mac's interpretation. Corbin picked up the little note, his gaze sharp, assessing. He ran a thumb over the delicate Arabic script. "So, your husband. He knew all this time." His voice was flat, devoid of judgment, but the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Rena flinched. "He was sick, Detective, and scared. He thought I'd never forgive him. He thought he'd lost her." Her voice broke. "But now, we have a chance, don't we?" Corbin leaned back in his creaking chair, his eyes fixed on the coordinates. "It's unusual. Very unusual. Most runaways don't vanish into the Egyptian desert. And 10 years is a long time." He paused, his gaze drifting to the missing persons poster of a smiling 8-year-old Lila that still hung on his board. He'd looked at that face 1,000 times, always hitting a dead end. But this was new, tangible. He sighed, a long, drawn-out breath. "Look, Mrs. Marlowe, I'm retired from active duty. But this case, it never sat right with me." He tapped the table. "These coordinates, this note, it changes everything. It gives us a direction, a real direction." He looked at Rena, a flicker of something almost akin to excitement in his tired eyes. "Consider me on the case. Unofficially, of course, but consider me in." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled Rena's knees, washed over her. After 10 years of chasing ghosts, of clinging to fragile threads of hope, a door had finally, agonizingly, creaked open. The desert had whispered a secret, and now, finally, they had someone willing to listen. The hum of the Boeing 737 was a strange, disorienting drone after years of bus engines and hospital quiet. Rena stared out the window, the patchwork fields of the American Midwest giving way to the shimmering vastness of the Atlantic. Beside her, Tommy, usually so stoic, shifted restlessly, a mixture of anxiety and fierce determination etched on his face. Detective Corbin, ever the professional, sat across the aisle, his gaze steady, seemingly unfazed by the thousands of miles separating them from their comfortable lives. He'd pulled strings, called in favors, and secured what he called expedited travel arrangements, a thinly veiled attempt to get them on the first available flight without raising too many official flags. The journey was a blur of recycled air, cramped seats, and the gnawing anticipation of what lay ahead. Rena clutched the printout of the coordinates, the small paper a fragile bridge to a past she desperately wanted to reclaim. Every tremor of the plane, every sudden drop, sent a jolt of fear through her, a visceral reminder of the danger that lay in the unknown. But beneath the fear, a tenacious hope pulsed. After a decade of waiting, of not knowing, they were finally moving. When they finally touched down in Cairo, the assault on their senses was immediate and overwhelming. The air was thick with dust, the smell of exhaust fumes mingling with exotic spices. Horns blared, voices clamored, and the sheer press of humanity was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban streets they'd left behind. They spent a night in a small, impersonal hotel, the city's vibrant chaos a relentless hum outside their window, making sleep elusive. The next morning, an old beat-up SUV with a local guide arranged by Corbin drove them away from the bustling metropolis deeper into the desert. The landscape shifted dramatically. Modern buildings gave way to crumbling mud-brick villages, then to stretches of endless ochre sand, punctuated by ancient, silent ruins. The sun was a relentless disk in a sky of searing blue, casting long, stark shadows. "The Fayoum Oasis," their guide, a man with wise, crinkled eyes, announced in heavily accented English, gesturing broadly at the desolate landscape. "Ancient, many stories here, and some not so happy." As they drove further, the road deteriorated into a rough, unpaved track. The air grew hotter, drier. The occasional small cluster of date palms seemed like a miracle in the barren expanse. Then, on the horizon, a darker smudge appeared, growing steadily larger. As they drew closer, the smudge resolved into a series of broken walls, collapsed archways, and mounds of rubble, half buried by shifting sands. It looked like a forgotten skeleton of a city, bleached by the sun and time. "These are the ruins of a Roman-era settlement," the guide explained, his voice low. "Abandoned centuries ago. But it is said that people still live here. Those who seek to be unseen. Away from the world." Rena felt a chill despite the oppressive heat, where freedom whispers in the sand. The words echoed in her mind, taking on a new, unsettling meaning. This desolate, ancient place, rumored to be a sanctuary for the unseen, for those who lived on the fringes of society. Could an 8-year-old girl, desperate for freedom, have found a home here? The possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the SUV finally rumbled to a halt amidst the silent, sun-baked ruins, Rena stepped out, the ancient dust crunching under her feet. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. 10 years. 10 years of searching, and now, finally, the whispers of the desert might just reveal their long-held secret. The dust swirled around them, an ancient golden haze that seemed to hold the very breath of time. As Rena, Tommy, and Detective Corbin ventured deeper into the sun-baked ruins, the air grew thick with the scent of dry earth and something faintly metallic like old iron. The silence here was profound, broken only by the crunch of their shoes on centuries of debris and the distant whisper of the wind through broken archways. Suddenly, a flicker of movement. From behind a crumbling wall, a figure emerged, then another, and another. They weren't the expected grizzled vagrants, but rather a group of young people ranging from late teens to early 30s, their faces tanned and weathered by the sun, their clothes simple and patched, yet worn with an almost defiant grace. They carried themselves with an easy confidence, their eyes sharp and assessing. They were an enigma, a living, breathing part of the ancient landscape. One young man with striking dark eyes and a lean, athletic build stepped forward, his expression wary. "Who are you? What brings you to our home?" His English was unaccented, surprisingly fluent. Corbin, ever the diplomat, raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "We're looking for someone, a relative. She may have come here many years ago." He held up a faded photo of 8-year-old Lila, her gap-toothed smile radiating innocence. The young man's gaze flickered to the photo, then to Rena and Tommy, lingering on Tommy for a moment. A subtle change crossed his face, a flicker of something unreadable. He exchanged a quick glance with another young woman standing slightly behind him. Then she stepped forward. The sun, momentarily obscured by a passing cloud, seemed to burst forth again, illuminating her face in a golden glow. Her hair, a cascade of sun-streaked brown, was pulled back in a loose braid. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as Rena's, held a depth and intensity far beyond her apparent years. A small scar, barely visible, traced the line of her left eyebrow, and though her features were more mature, sharper, honed by a life of hardship and independence, there was an unmistakable echo of the child in the photograph. Rena's breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which had been a frantic drumbeat for a decade, now simply stopped. It was like seeing a ghost, a living, breathing embodiment of her deepest fears and wildest dreams. "Lila!" Rena's voice was a ragged whisper, a raw cry torn from her soul. The young woman's blue eyes, so familiar yet so distant, met hers. For a long, agonizing moment she said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "My name is Lila now," she said, her voice low and steady with a subtle, earthy accent Rena couldn't quite place. "But yes, I was Lila." The words, simple and profound, shattered the decade of silence. Rena stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face, a guttural sob escaping her lips. "Lila, my baby! Oh my God, my baby!" She reached out, her arms trembling, desperate to touch, to confirm this impossible reality. Lila didn't immediately recoil, but she didn't embrace her either. Her gaze, though direct, held a wary distance. You're my mother," she stated, not as a question but as a statement of fact, as if she were simply observing a natural phenomenon. Tommy, who had been frozen in disbelief, finally found his voice. "Lila, it's me, Tommy, your brother." He took a tentative step forward, his own eyes wide with a mixture of shock and overwhelming emotion. Layla's eyes softened infinitesimally as they landed on Tommy. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Tommy, you've grown." The familiarity in her voice, the ghost of their shared childhood, was a searing balm to Tommy's long-aching heart. The young man who had first approached them put a protective hand on Layla's shoulder. "Layla is one of us," he said, his voice firm. "She came to us many years ago, lost, searching for her own path. She found it here. She found her freedom." Rena looked from Layla to the young man, then to the silent, watchful faces of the other members of the community. A lifetime of questions surged within her, a desperate need for answers. How? Why? What had happened? But the most important question, the one that overshadowed all others, was already answered. Lila was alive. And after 10 years, the whispers in the sand had finally led them home. The desert wind, which had seemed a whisper of freedom in the legends, now felt like a cold, tangible barrier between them. Layla stood before them, a young woman forged by the harsh realities of the ruins, her blue eyes holding a wisdom that Rena, despite her years, couldn't comprehend. The initial shock of recognition had given way to a chilling distance. Rena, tears still tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks, took another tentative step forward. "Lila, please, talk to me. Tell me what happened. Why didn't you come back?" Her voice was raw, laced with a decade of unanswered questions. Layla's gaze was unblinking. Come back to what? To the anger? To the silence? To a father who looked at me like I was a burden? Her voice was devoid of malice, simply a statement of truth, delivered with an almost clinical detachment. "I ran. I wanted to be free. And here," she gestured around the ancient crumbling walls, "I found it. I found a place where I belonged. A family." The young man who had first greeted them, whose name was Malik, stepped closer to Layla, a silent pillar of support. "Layla is strong," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "She came to us a scared child. We taught her how to survive, how to live. We are her family now." Rena flinched as if struck. "But we're your family, your real family. Your mother, your brother. We never stopped looking for you. We thought you were dead." The words tumbled out, desperate and accusatory. Layla finally shifted, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I know, I'm sorry, but I was so small, and I was so afraid, and I thought no one cared if I was gone." A flicker of vulnerability, fleeting as a desert mirage, crossed her face. "Here, I was safe. I was seen. I learned to hunt, to track, to understand the desert. I learned to be." Rena felt a fresh wave of tears, but this time they were tears of regret, of deep, aching sorrow. "Oh, my darling," she choked out, reaching for Layla's hand, her fingers trembling. "I am so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. Sorry I didn't see how much you were hurting. Sorry I didn't fix things with your father. It was never your fault. None of it." She clung to Layla's hand, a silent plea for connection. Layla allowed the touch, her hand surprisingly warm in Rena's. She looked at Tommy then, a softer expression on her face. "Tommy, you're You're a man now." "I missed you, Lila," Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single day. It wasn't the same without you. Dad." He spiraled. It destroyed him, Lila. He's not the same person. He's trying, really trying to get better. He needs you. We all need you. He swallowed hard, the years of suppressed grief threatening to overwhelm him. "He's sick, Lila, but he misses you more than anything. He's trying to make things right. For you." Layla's gaze drifted to the distant horizon, her expression unreadable once more. The wind rustled through the ancient stones, a melancholic whisper. She had found her freedom in the desert, built a new life, a new identity. But the call of a past, a family she had left behind, was a subtle, insistent tug, a faint echo in the vast silence of her chosen world. The decision, Rena knew, lay entirely with Layla. And the wait, after 10 years, felt like an eternity. The flight back to the States was a silent, somber affair. Rena, Tommy, and Detective Corbin carried with them not only the exhaustion of travel but the immense, unsettling weight of what they had learned. Lila was alive. She was a woman now, hardened by a life Rena couldn't fathom, and she hadn't wanted to come home. The revelation was a dizzying mix of relief and profound heartbreak. As they pulled into their quiet suburban driveway, the house, usually a haven of routine, now felt like a stage set for an impending confrontation. The blinds were drawn, a grim shroud over the windows. Rick's old truck was parked haphazardly, a sign of his continued, self-inflicted exile. Inside, the air was thick with the stale scent of whiskey and neglect. Rick was sprawled on the living room sofa, a half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon clutched in his hand, his face puffy and discolored. The TV blared a meaningless static. He barely registered their arrival, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Rena's jaw tightened. The exhaustion that had been gnawing at her all week suddenly coalesced into a sharp, burning anger. A decade of lies, of unanswered questions, of living in a haunted house with a ghost of a husband. And all the while he had known. Tommy, sensing the shift in his mother's demeanor, put a hand on her arm, a silent plea for calm. But Rena shook it off. This wasn't just about Lila anymore. This was about everything. She walked directly to Rick, her shadow falling over his slumped form. With a swift, decisive movement, she snatched the bottle from his hand. The clink as it hit the coffee table was sharp, cutting through the droning static. Rick stirred, blinking owlishly. What the hell, Rena? Leave it." "No," Rena said, her voice low, trembling with a fury that had been simmering for years. "Not anymore. Not when I finally know the truth." Rick pushed himself up, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of awareness piercing through the alcoholic haze. "Truth? What truth are you talking about?" "Lila," Rena spat, the name a raw, searing accusation. "She wasn't kidnapped, was she, Rick? She ran away, and you knew." The blood drained from Rick's face, leaving it ashen. The bravado, the drunken belligerence evaporated, replaced by a terrible gut-wrenching fear. He looked like a cornered animal. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his gaze darting nervously to Tommy, then to Corbin, who stood silently by the doorway. "Don't lie to me, Rick." Rena's voice rose, cracking with raw emotion. "Tommy found your stupid diary, and your locket. The note, Rick, the note. She chose her path. Find her where freedom whispers in the sand. You let her go. You let our 8-year-old daughter wander off into a foreign desert, and then you lied to us for 10 years. 10 years, Rick. Do you have any idea what we've been through? What I've been through?" Tears streamed down her face, but these were tears of rage, not sorrow. Rick flinched as if she had struck him. He buried his face in his hands, a guttural groan escaping his lips. I couldn't tell you. I thought you'd hate me. I thought you'd leave me. I tried to find her, Rena. I swear to God, I tried." His voice was a broken whisper, filled with a desperate, pathetic plea for understanding. "You tried?" Rena scoffed, the sound laced with bitter scorn. "You let her go. You chose your shame over your daughter, over your family." She paced, her movements agitated, every word a hammer blow. "She's alive, Rick. We found her, in the ruins, living with a community of strangers, because she thought we didn't care, because she thought she was alone." Rick's head shot up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a flicker of something almost like hope. "Alive? She's alive?" The revelation seemed to sober him, if only for a moment. "Yes, she's alive," Rena cried, tears mixing with the fury. "But she doesn't want to come home. She doesn't know us. She doesn't know you." She stopped in front of him, her chest heaving. "This ends now, Rick. No more hiding, no more drinking. You will get help. You will get sober. And you will face what you did. Because if you want any chance, any hope of seeing your daughter again, of being a father to Tommy, you have to fight for it. You have to fight for us. Do you understand?" Her voice, though broken, held an unwavering resolve. It wasn't a question, but a demand. Rick looked at her, at Tommy, at Corbin, the weight of his decade-long deceit finally crushing him. He nodded, slowly, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing remorse. The journey to the desert had uncovered Lila's truth. Now, the journey home had forced Rick to confront his own. The long, arduous path to redemption had just begun. Layla's presence in their small suburban house was like a foreign object, a beautiful, sharp-edged shard of the desert brought into a world of polished wood and soft fabrics. She moved with a quiet self-possession, her gaze missing nothing, yet she remained largely unreadable. The clothes Rena bought her felt alien on her skin. The silence of their evenings was unsettling after the constant murmuring life of the ruins. She ate sparingly, often preferring to sit cross-legged on the floor rather than at the dining table, her blue eyes distant as if still scanning a vast horizon. The immediate euphoria of finding her had slowly given way to the immense, complicated reality of their fractured family. Rena, despite her aching heart, understood. Lila, or Layla, as she now preferred, had built a life, an identity, far from them. To expect her to simply step back into the role of the little girl who ran away was naive, even cruel. Rena became a quiet observer, trying to learn her daughter all over again, to bridge the decade of lost time with patience and small, gentle overtures. The real battle, however, was in the living room, and often in the quiet, desperate hours of the night. Rick, after Rena's brutal reckoning, had indeed begun the arduous climb out of his self-made prison. The whiskey bottles disappeared, replaced by gallon jugs of water. The shaking started, then the cold sweats, the tremors, and the agonizing withdrawal. Rena, a nurse by profession, became his reluctant, exhausted caregiver, monitoring his symptoms, forcing him to eat, enduring his raw, unfocused anger. He started therapy, grudgingly at first, then with a desperate earnestness. The VA counselor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evans, dug into the festering wounds of his PTSD, unearthing the horrors he'd buried, the guilt he'd carried. Rick attended veteran support groups, his voice initially a whisper among the shared stories of combat and recovery, slowly growing stronger. He spoke about Fallujah, about the constant fear, the loss, and then the crushing shame of losing Lila, of letting her go. His attempts to connect with Layla were halting, agonizing. He'd bring her a cup of tea, leave a book he thought she might like by her bed, or simply sit in the living room, watching her from a distance, a raw, naked yearning in his eyes. One evening, he found her sitting on the back porch staring at the suburban stars, so different from the desert sky. He sat beside her, the silence between them thick with unspoken things. "Lila," he began, his voice rough. "Layla, I was wrong. About everything. I was so lost, so afraid. And I put that on you. I drove you away." He paused, swallowing hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I'm going to spend every single day trying to earn it, trying to be the father I should have been." Layla said nothing, her gaze still fixed on the distant pinpricks of light. But Rena, watching from the kitchen window, saw a subtle shift in her daughter's posture, a slight softening. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first, tentative lowering of a 10-year-old guard. Tommy, meanwhile, was the family's quiet anchor. He'd spend hours talking to Layla, sharing stories of their childhood, showing her old photo albums, patiently reintroducing her to a life she'd left behind. He'd take her to the local library, to the park, to quiet coffee shops, simply letting her observe, absorb, and slowly, gently, guiding her back into the rhythm of their world. He was the bridge, built of shared memories and unwavering love, connecting the past to the fragile present. Rena watched them, her heart aching with a familiar blend of exhaustion and a new, precious hope. They were a family fractured, raw, and deeply scarred, but for the first time in a decade they were all, undeniably, on the long, arduous road home. A year had passed, and the echoes in the Marlowe house were no longer those of absence and despair, but of rebuilding. The silence that once suffocated was now filled with the gentle hum of a shared life, albeit one still delicately balanced. Layla, her chosen name now flowing naturally from everyone's lips, had found her rhythm. The wildness of the desert still lived in her eyes, but it was tempered by a newfound curiosity about the world she had re-entered. She had enrolled in community college, surprising Rena and Tommy by choosing a general studies path, then quickly gravitating towards anthropology and urban planning. Her fascination with ancient societies and their structures, cultivated in the ruins, found a modern parallel in how cities functioned. She still preferred long walks, often disappearing for hours into the sprawling nature preserves that bordered their town, a habit that once terrified Rena but now filled her with a quiet understanding. Layla also volunteered regularly at a local shelter for young adults experiencing homelessness, a quiet, empathetic presence connecting with individuals who, like her, had sought solace on the fringes. It was her way of giving back, of translating her own unique journey into a source of strength for others. Rick's recovery was a testament to sheer grit and the unwavering, if sometimes strained, support of his family. The initial raw agony of withdrawal had given way to the slow, painstaking work of confronting his demons. Dr. Evans had called him a textbook case of resilience, but Rena knew it was more than that. It was the desperate need to mend what he had broken. He continued his therapy, attended veteran meetings religiously, and even started leading some peer support groups for fellow veterans grappling with PTSD. His eyes, once clouded by alcohol and pain, now held a clearer, albeit still haunted, light. He had found purpose in helping others navigate the darkness he had so intimately known. His interactions with Layla, once tentative and fraught, had blossomed into a fragile, evolving relationship. He no longer pushed, but waited. He listened. He learned. He shared stories, not just of his military past, but of his childhood, of the man he was before the war, before the loss. He cooked for her, quietly leaving plates of her favorite foods, discovered through Rena's subtle questioning, on her bedroom desk. One crisp autumn evening, a year after her return, Layla found... "Dad?" she said softly, the word feeling both new and ancient on her tongue. Rick started, then slowly turned. His face, weathered by years of internal struggle, softened into a gentle smile. "Layla, everything all right?" She walked closer, stopping beside him. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting them in hues of orange and gold. I was thinking," she began, her voice a little hesitant, "about that symbol, the desert wanderer." Rick nodded, his gaze distant. Yeah, Mac told you, right? I always saw it as a protector, for those who seek their own path. Lila knelt beside him, picking up a handful of rich, dark earth. I think you were trying to protect me, even when you were at your worst, even when you were pushing me away. Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with a truth that had been too long unspoken. You just didn't know how. Rick's eyes, bright with unshed tears, met hers. He dropped the small trowel, his hands trembling slightly. Lila, he choked out, using her old name for the first time in what felt like forever. I messed up. I know I did. There's no excuse. I was lost. So lost. Layla reached out, her hand, strong and calloused from years in the desert, covering his. Her touch was hesitant, yet firm. We were both lost, Dad. For a long time. She squeezed his hand gently. But we found our way back, to each other, and I think that's what that symbol truly means. Not just protection, but finding your way back, home. A tear finally escaped Rick's eye, tracing a path through the lines on his cheek. He squeezed her hand back, a silent acknowledgement, a raw, unspoken plea for forgiveness that Layla, finally, seemed to understand. Rena and Tommy watched from the kitchen window, their hearts swelling with an emotion too profound for words. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, but in the backyard, a new dawn was breaking. The scars remained, etched deep into their family's story, a testament to the pain they had endured. But beneath those scars, something new and strong was growing, rooted in understanding, forgiveness, and the enduring, unbreakable ties of a family finally, truly, coming home. The journey was far from over, but the whispers in the sand had brought them full circle to a place of hope, of connection, and of healing.